Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer from English with Jennifer. Sometimes my language lessons are upbeat and playful. Other times I aim to be more thought-provoking. This is going to be one of my more serious lessons. Racism is not a light issue. It definitely falls into the category of sensitive topics. I ask that if you choose to post a comment on this video, please keep it respectful. Anything offensive or with profanity will be deleted. I'm not here to lecture anyone or politicize the topic. I'm an English language teacher, and I'd like to give English language learners some relevant information and vocabulary so that they can follow and participate in discussions about race and racism. The United States is experiencing a major period of social unrest at the moment. Whether you're in the U.S. or not, you've probably seen many images of protests taking place in American cities. There's a lot of anger and frustration stemming from racism. That's the practice of judging others and mistreating others based on race. When Americans are asked to fill out official forms and identify our race, we're usually given these choices: white, black or African American, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander. And often there's a category called other, which we can choose if we're a mix, or we may be allowed to check off more than one category. A questionnaire might also ask us if we're of Hispanic or Latino origin, or not of Hispanic or Latino origin. The use of Black and African American can be confusing. What you need to know is that both words are acceptable. Many consider African American to be a politically correct term, but the word Black is not offensive. Some make the distinction that Black is about race and African American is about ethnicity. Please know that the words colored and Negro are outdated. They are offensive in the U.S. today. Race and ethnicity can be quite complex in a diverse country like the U.S. I felt compelled to make this video because the recent unrest has made me reflect more on how being American is a different experience for people, partly because of our different races. I was born a U.S. citizen. I grew up as a native English speaker. When most people look at me, they see a white woman. My father came to the U.S. as a foreigner. He eventually got citizenship. English, for him, is a second language. My father is a dark-skinned Southeast Asian man. So our experiences of being American have been different. And yet I know we both love our country. One of the darker aspects of our country is racism. Right now, there's a lot of focus on what it means to be Black in America. But racism has been experienced by other groups as well throughout our history. A person who discriminates against others based on race is a racist. This person has racist views, racist attitudes, and perhaps racist practices. A person can experience racism or be a victim of racism. A racist feels that one race is inferior and another is superior, In other words, they believe that some people are better than others, simply because of race. If a racist is white and has a sense of superiority and believes that white people should have control, we identify this person as a white supremacist. Supremacist is related to the adjective supreme, meaning being the highest or having the highest authority. So a supremacist believes in domination, that is, power or control over other races. Domination is the noun. Dominate is the verb. Some people try to dominate others. Superiority is the noun. Superior is the adjective. Someone can feel superior or act superior. The recent protests in America are a call for justice. African Americans or Black Americans want to live in peace. They want to enjoy freedom from unjust practices. Unjust is another word for unfair. We need to fight against unjust practices. We need to fight against racist practices. We need to fight against discrimination. We need to fight prejudice. As I understand, prejudice is a matter of how you think and feel. A prejudiced person has an unfair dislike of another person or a whole other race. Discrimination takes the form of action. So a company that discriminates against women, for example, treats female job candidates and female employees unfairly. So discrimination can take different forms. For example, there can be sexual discrimination or racial discrimination. The history of discrimination against African Americans goes back to the days of slavery, and racism took root in our laws immediately after the Civil War ended in 1865. Follow me on Instagram if you want to know more about U.S. history. One of my upcoming clips will explain what Jim Crow laws were. For now, just know that we once had laws that made inequality for African Americans legal. For a long time in our country, blacks and whites lived with racial segregation. That's the practice of keeping whites and blacks separate, including restrooms, drinking fountains, and other public places. Did you know, by the way, that interracial marriages became legal in all U.S. states only in 1967? The civil rights movement began in the mid-1900s, and organizers led African Americans to fight for equal rights. They fought for social justice, but the fight to fully end racial discrimination continues today. Even before the civil rights movement, there were efforts to fight for justice and equality. The NAACP formed in 1909. This is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It's still probably the largest organization that fights against racism. Another group that has received global support is Black Lives Matter. This is both a movement and a global network of people who fight to stop violence against Black communities. You've probably seen the hashtag BLM. That stands for Black Lives Matter. Civil rights leaders of the 1950s and 60s largely promoted the idea of peaceful protests and sit-ins. Protest is the noun. Stress falls on the first syllable, protest. Protest can also be the verb. Stress can fall on the first or second syllable, protest, protest. The people who do this action are protesters. Note the two different possible spellings. A protest might take the form of a march down a street. A sit-in is when people sit in a public place and refuse to leave. They want their demands to be heard and met. A concern about large protests is crowd control. One measure a city or town can take is a curfew. That's when a mayor or a governor makes it illegal to be outside your home and on the streets after a certain time at night. Lately, in cities with violent protests, there have been 8 o'clock curfews. A city can announce a curfew, set a curfew, institute a curfew, impose a curfew, and later the curfew can be lifted. Note the contrast between a peaceful protest and a violent protest. In the U.S., people have the right to protest peacefully, but the government has the right and the duty to prevent chaos. That's complete disorder. Mayhem is another word for chaos, but mayhem suggests violence on top of disorder. So what's the difference between mayhem and anarchy? As I understand, mayhem is a bunch of destructive actions, unlawful actions. A person or a group of people can create mayhem. Anarchy is the state in which people live without order or laws. I mentioned that some U.S. cities have used a curfew to help keep the protests peaceful and avoid violence. I've heard that some arrests have been made when people break curfew or violate the curfew. Other causes for arrest are looting and arson. Looting is stealing. It's the act of stealing during a violent protest or in wartime. Arson is the crime of setting fire to buildings or other objects, like cars. Sadly, we've witnessed a lot of looting and arson recently, and although these crimes are taking place during the protests, we need to be careful not to group the peaceful protesters with the looters and arsonists. Most reporters are distinguishing between the angry mobs committing crimes and causing violence and the peaceful protesters. A mob is an angry group of people out of control. Mobs create riots. A riot is when people are angry and out of control. People who participate in riots are rioters. Many believe that the rioters, the looters, and the arsonists are hijacking the peaceful protests and creating mayhem. Hardly anyone is condoning the violence and the destruction we've been seeing. Condone means to approve of something. In fact, many people, even some members of the police force, stand in solidarity with the peaceful protesters. Solidarity means unity. A protest or riot usually has a trigger. That's an event that sets off a reaction. Recently, Americans witnessed the death of an unarmed African American man at the hands of a white police officer. This terrible event was captured on video. It triggered a strong reaction because it's connected to a larger issue of racism and police brutality. That's the excessive use of force by police officers. There are at least two arguments being made in connection to this horrific incident. One is that we have systemic racism. That means that unfair practices are in our system. They're within our institutions. Is the police force, is law enforcement full of racism? A counter-argument in this case is that there are many police officers who are good public servants. People who take this position acknowledge that law enforcement needs to do a better job of training and get rid of those who are not capable of serving and protecting the communities and community members without excessive force. Which argument is right? Where's the truth? Is the truth somewhere in between? Some argue further that we need to fight against racial profiling. That's the practice of suspecting people of criminal behavior based on their race or ethnicity. I think it's true that people can too quickly and too easily make faulty assumptions about others. The question is, are we making assumptions based on race? Are we giving people an equal opportunity and equal consideration in every situation? Can we look for the best in people and stop assuming the worst? We'll end our lesson here. I hope you've gained the language to continue this discussion with others and to express your views on this topic. Actions will always speak louder than words, but I'd like to think that through honest, open discussion, we can take a step closer to achieving equality for all and to fostering respect for all people. If you found the lesson useful, please like and share this video. As always, thanks for watching and happy studies. Peace to all. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and try something new. Download the apps KikiTime and Holo. These are more ways I can help you learn English each and every week. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Turn on those notifications.